next presentation, I got to have get a sneak peek a little bit of this conversation last night at the Web3 privacy event. And so I want to welcome PG on stage to introduce the rest of our panel here.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. Good evening. And welcome to this international friendly competition of unicorns stabbing unicorns. Woo! No joking. Probably happening around closing party, I guess, I hope. Please welcome on stage Ameen Soleimani and Serinko to join me and Kieran for this panel on Solarpunk versus Lunarpunk. Ooh, eggs. I like it. So I'm quite thrilled to be on stage with these guys, being for me a wellspring of inspiration and knowledge for a long time. And I would love to kick this off, asking you to quickly introduce yourself, as well as giving to the crowd a short take on what's your angle in developing privacy-preserving technologies.
My name is Kieran Mesquita. I'm the CTO of Railgun. I'm Ameen Soleimani. Working on privacy pools and OxBow now, and my take on privacy that's unique is that I think privacy is great for good people, and I would try to not associate with the people I don't want to associate with while I keep privacy. And I want to help other projects also do that if they're interested.
Hi, I'm actually Kieran Mesquita. I think for me, privacy personally is just I want to I personally just want to empower people to be able to choose what sort of information they reveal to people, not be forced into revealing everything by default.
Good afternoon. I'm Serinko, developer relations at NIM. That's a Privacy Labs company, and community contributor of some privacy research in LunarDao and other projects. My take on privacy is that privacy is just, it's a step, it's a tactic, at best a strategy to get us towards freedom. It's not a goal on itself, and I think this is very important to realize, that we're not striving for privacy. Privacy and anonymity is, for us, a pathway, a shield for the environment and for who we are in order to live the way we want to live.
Cool. Before we were talking about what kind of definition or image can we give or values we can attribute to this kind of categories. So Solarpunk, Lunarpunk, and a punk even. So I would love you to ask, how do you see these kind of figures and ideals? How can we define them or explain them to the people?
So punk, to me, generally, is like a form of moral entrepreneurship. It's a risky strategy. Being a punk means you're promoting something that is not societally accepted, but you believe in strongly enough that you are trying to make it mainstream. And so there's different generations of punks, but ultimately you're trying to create some sort of value and embody that value through your own culture, and then finally end up. And so in the context of privacy and software and blockchains and stuff, we have these two sort of bigger categories, Lunarpunk and Solarpunk. And Lunarpunk is typically defensive technology, for people who have to operate by night because there's surveillance or oppression, and maintaining their privacy is a tool for keeping their security. Whereas Solarpunk is more for higher trust societies where you can operate in the open and coordinate and work together. And I think I'll stop there and let you guys answer too.
Yeah, I think for me this is not a model in which the entire society should operate. It's rather a helpful way of imagination, science fiction, culture within a scope of hardware, software, especially software development, and then of course Web3, because that kind of comes with that. we can measure through different boxes of how these different punks approach utopia versus dystopia, approach individual versus collective. And sometimes these dichotomies are helpful for us to understand different school of thoughts or different groups of people who represent these school of thoughts, but also they are not black and white. So how I see cypherpunk is there is a strong critique of the surveillance, and it's very useful in that, and the tooling which comes out of that. What might be maybe not really fitting for me is the dystopian take on that, because I think to teach and therefore learn about all these threats is important, but becomes a bit difficult when it creates fear. What is about Solarpunk nice is that they try to battle that fear with bringing very utopistic view. What for me is not working then there is that it might be naive, because the utopistic view might be not really taking account the threats enough. That doesn't mean that it propagates them itself. A lot of people told me, you and the crew around DarkFi and the whole LunarDao, you're proposing that Solarpunk is actually pro-statist. No Solarpunks ever said we are pro-statist. Well, it's not necessarily a question pro or against, but it's more like to which narrative, what narrative you create to which another narrative can take advantage of that. And like, is it like a space for liberalism or for actually like any more deeper changes of the society? So I think Lunarpunk, rather than be, above or better, kind of takes a bit of both, but is neither. So I'm not saying it's a mix, but it inherits and learns from both of those, from one, to have positive visions and build towards something, not just against something, but while keeping the critique and the tooling of the cypherpunks against the surveillance. That's what I find powerful into this particular narrative and what I like about it. However, again, as I said in the beginning, I don't think that's a solution for entire society. It's rather a useful, within this crowd, useful category to answer some of these questions where we stand about utopia, surveillance, dystopia, state, and all these questions in kind of shorter and more sci-fi imaginary kind of way.
Yeah, I think so with Solarpunks, it's a very idealistic and utopian worldview, and then Lunarpunk is really just a tempering of that with a bit of defensiveness, let's say, and I think the tempering of like the Solarpunk worldview really is it's great that we want to go and build for this ideal, right? We want to build for a better world. I don't think anyone would disagree with that. But we can't really be like naive in the way we build things and just assume that no one's ever going to try and attack it or break or exploit or take advantage, whatever, of the systems that we put out there. And so in building for a better world, we also need to make sure that these systems that we're building are resilient to forms of attack.
I just want to give like a concrete example here. So like Gitcoin is like your sort of shining star of like Solarpunk values, right? It's all transparent. They do quadratic funding. You could sign up with the Gitcoin passport. Identify yourself. Maybe there's some proof of humanity, so you can prove you're a real human. And there's like a whole stack of tools that allow people to coordinate. But it's sort of like when there's no adversaries, right? And so it's like the minute I'm like, okay, so now I want to use this to help Iranian activists. And it's like, well, shit. We're going to need an entirely different stack for this. And that stack is going to be like anonymous, privacy preserving, like, uses a bunch of different systems, like half of the things that Kieran just pitched on his last talk, like note-taking needs to be private. Like you can't have leaked anything, right? It's like, and that's not the kind of thing that like Gitcoin as Solarpunks are like concerned about because they're not thinking in a particularly adversarial model versus like that's where the Lunarpunk tools and ethos thrives because you are dealing with adversaries that you're going to take, realistic Yeah.
My take on this is that, I fear that as we in the past and in the present we have right and left and polarization, dualism and extremism, we kind of bring people focusing on what they disagree on rather than on the common ground they can find to pursue a common objective. So how do you feel we can actually overcome this disagreement and competition where a common ground can be founded? And I mean, as privacy is a human right, it's not just, and should be normal, it's not just a bizarre claim of Lunarpunk people. Open question, one answer.
Well, I think that the thing is, it's just there's a very strong bias towards like the default, right? So if we have systems that are strongly private and those are the ones that are used, then that's just the way it is, and we end up having a lot of like resistance towards weakening or breaking that privacy. But on the converse, we have something that's like completely transparent and like radically open, and maybe is just published to a distributed ledger that is going to be available till the end of time, maybe. And we try to like say, oh well, we've got to make this private. Then there's a lot of resistance to that, right? And so I think it's just, whenever you start building a system, if you want privacy to just be accepted as like privacy is normal, yep, privacy is normal. I think like you just sort of have to build privacy in from the start. Make it what's normal.
I think we live in a society which is there is new religion in the West. That's science. That's positivism in a way, and it makes a lot of sense and helps us to answer a lot of questions. However, the problem of positivism is that it brings this subject-object-oriented point of view. So when we ask about who is extremist, who is terrorist, or right and left, like it almost sounds like a general objective thing. Well, it's highly relative. Who is asking? Who is answering? Right? We're gonna have a look on Bernie Sanders, the left kind of candidate for, then you're gonna travel a few kilometers to Cuba and you're like, is he really that leftist? You're gonna ask the Cubans, like they might have a different opinion. Who's extremist, like asking east of Ukraine and then go a bit more east, what is already taken by Russians, and ask who is terrorist then? You're gonna have completely different answers. Do that in Jerusalem and just cross the street. So I think these categories might be sometimes useful, but they are not really normal, not normal. So I myself am not that really stuck on what's normal and what's not, but to be able to hold contradictions and bring examples into real life and things how we use them. I was building an argument that we use, like privacy means also voluntary disclosure, right? Privacy doesn't mean that I don't want anyone to know anything about me. Only what it means is that each of you, just as in real life, you choose what about you present to different people. And you do that when you're going to ask to a job for the first time, you present something a bit different than if you go to your psychotherapist. And you present something different than if you talk about your partner's family for the first time. Is that normal or not? I don't know, but it seems kind of natural to me, And now we live in a time when another dichotomy, online, offline, like what does that really mean? In these places, especially in conferences like that, people who come here are very interested in tech. So this nature versus tech, online, offline, I think we also beyond that. So how comes that on the internet all of a sudden, I'll be talking about it tomorrow a lot, I'll go deep about metadata and all that type of stuff on a presentation upstairs. How comes that then we go to the internet side of things and everything by protocol, by default, is completely transparent? That's fucked up. Excuse my French, but that is problem. Like it's basically like you go to ask for a job for the first time, and you are standing there in front of whoever might be your boss, naked like if you go to the doctor, with your soul open like if you go to a psychotherapist, with the same things you shared to your bestie for 20 years, in that to that person. that's being on the internet today. So not to give these boxes right or wrong, normal, not normal. Well, let's this question might ask this, might answer that question by itself.
There's some jobs that you might actually want to show up naked for. I mean, if it's like a nude modeling job, for example. But again, it's you choose to disclose that. I'm just messing with them. But there's
we don't do that at NAME.
Yeah, well, there's other companies out there. So one thing I'll say is that we have this like Solarpunk, Lunarpunk, and it's not like different people will find themselves in these different categories at different parts of their lives. There's a saying that like decentralization maxis are not born, they are made, right? Like I got started with Bitcoin and then lost all my money in Mt. Gox. And then I learned the value of decentralization, right? Many people start out Solarpunk and then they get rugged or they get hacked or some service that they trusted reveals their info. And after that, you realize, oh, well, maybe we should engineer systems to be more resilient, to take into account adversaries. And so there's like a pipeline of Solarpunk to Lunarpunk that exists out there. And in a similar way, like he's talking about having systems that can manage contradictions, right? Like the U.S. Constitution is cool. It's a result of people fleeing religious oppression and tyranny in the United Kingdom and stuff. And they made it to America, and they were like, all right, we're going to have a Bill of Rights. We're going to encode minority protections into our system, because they were thinking very adversarially about their own government and the limits of power of our own government. And that's what allows multiple contradictory viewpoints to thrive within the same country. And so far, that's benefited America in some ways. It hurts America in other ways, but that's what we have. And yeah, I think it's like you want to tap into the energy of both the Solarpunk and the Lunarpunk and be able to promote what's useful in the context.
I would maybe add that the things we sometimes might say or might be understood or portrayed by adversaries speaking about privacy might sound like very tensed, like you always need to be on lookout. Well, in fact, is that if anonymity and privacy is set by default, you can be much more relaxed. And it's not to be tense. I'm also not talking only about, that's the difference between Cypherpunk and Lunarpunk perhaps, is the individual only, which is somewhere hidden with a black hoodie, versus like communities, squads, decentralized autonomous organizations and what have you. Meaning if you build the shield around you, I was living in places in real life where there is a threat for entire community to be just wiped off by an adversary. But then once people realize how to defend that surrounding, then within that they're thriving and they relax much more. And in fact, there is, in the end, like you don't need to have that tension that like, hey, what that person knows about me. No, like you become all of a sudden within the people you have chosen to be with your tribe, with your kind, with your squad, with your family, who is that? In fact, if you don't have that by default, you're going to start to look at everyone as a possible threat. But I think the narrative of privacy means that you are constantly scared is twisting that in order for people to not believe that and see that as like some like few bad sheep want privacy because they want to hide their bad malicious things, which is exactly the opposite of what we're actually talking about.
I was talking with a friend some days ago, and he was asking the most common question, like, why would you need privacy if you don't have anything to hide? And I was just answering, why would you need free will? It just should be by design. I mean, how do you feel to be like a Lunarpunk future or a Solarpunk future to be, and what's more idealistic considering the present state of the art in the market and in our crazy systems? Serinko.
I'm not sure I've understood the question very well, but I just spoke now, so I can be the easier one to like hide behind a corner now. But if you can repeat once again, but he knows what to say.
I think, well, this is a crypto conference, right? And I think, especially in crypto, we have a lot of people that are basically building for a very optimistic, very like Solarpunk future. Either that, or that's a mask for something else. But that's beside the point. But on the whole, the things that are being built in crypto are very Solarpunk. And while that's admirable, I think we sort of see a lot of cases where like, oh well, someone shipped a DeFi protocol and then like stuff happened and people lost their coins, right? Or oh yeah, like we can like trust in the goodwill of whatever actor, and then it turns out that you can't, right? And so we don't really have this like. I think we're building for a very Solarpunk future, but we don't have the like sort of immune system to like defend against threats, and like a lot of those threats are actually internal as well, which makes it so much worse. And so I think, as we start to get more mature, I guess, and a little bit less naive, and we are going to just end up, well, we have to, if we're going to survive, build for a more Lunarpunk, a more defensive, still optimistic, but not naive future.
Yeah, I just want to add to that a couple more examples, because I brought this up in the talk I gave, but the Nazis were really happy to discover how good the Dutch KYC was when they took over in World War II and then exterminated all the Jews here. A lot of Jews became Lunarpunk after that. And that's like one of those things where it's like, oh, who would ever abuse this system? We're building it because we're the good guys, and this is for security and tracking, blah, blah, blah. And it's like, yeah, but you didn't really consider the potential adversarial takeover of the system. And similarly today, we have the two areas of zero-knowledge proof applications that I'm most interested in, which is finance and voting for democracies. You have both those types of threats, right? Where governments are leaning towards building central bank digital currencies, CBDCs, that are essentially full surveillance systems, that are giant honeypots of everybody's financial data, that if they leak, could sacrifice the safety of everybody involved. And likewise, democratic systems, it's very interesting for the government to know exactly how everybody voted, especially if the government is becoming more oppressive. And so being able to both, vote in a digital way, like, okay, we need to get off the ballot stuff and somebody manually types in a database, like that can all be abused. But if we want to be able to properly digitize these systems, having privacy baked in would be really helpful, and also non-coercibility, so you can't like bribe somebody to vote a specific way and they can prove they voted that way because they can flip their vote halfway through and that way they could prove they voted either way. Vitalik has a post on this called On Collusion Resistance, but those are just two applications where it'll be really helpful to bring some of the Lunarpunk ethos to the development.
Well, I think there'll always be somebody or a group of people who try to take an advantage of another group of people. And if we say, no, now it's not happening now, we live in peace and everything's fine, well, that's only because we are not seen by the group of people who's taking advantage of another group of people as those being taken advantage of, over. That's simple as it is. There might be terrible things happening, there might be not. I don't want to be predicting future, whether it's alien invasion and nuclear warfare, COVID-25, AI robotic warfare, any of these little nuances, blockers for freedom. But free life is going to happen, yes or yes. There is no question about it, right? It's about up to us today and from this very minute onwards. Like this is the first day of the rest of our lives, as I always joke every morning. That plays every day, of course, except the day you die. But what I'm trying to say, in these scenarios, doomed they sound, they also have always been reality and people always survive and thrive through those. And it's really about see that I'm putting the most doom stuff up there because that creates like, oh, that's terrific. Yes, that creates very irregular situation, irregular warfare, which everyday person had always been in. Be that the example Ameen was just saying during the 40s in Europe, which were a terrible part of the history in Europe. But only because it was that terrible, we forgot about many of different things which were happening before, be that Inquisition, be the whole other, histories of fucked up things. That means that for people to figure out how to thrive in these repetitive events and what tools are needed to live as freely and as autonomously away from this oppression, have an alternative way to sustain life in a culture and in actual developing self and not just surviving in tension is very important. And I think when we don't break in real life and online, because a large part of our lives is digital, we realize that yes, indeed, cryptography is an incredible tool for managing or leveraging ourselves in this irregularity, in the fact that there is a crazy empire Serinko was talking about, invasion, aliens, nuclear bombing. Well, yeah, some of these things just wipe us out and we don't have to worry about. But what I'm saying is that there are quite some things in which you can leverage using zero-knowledge proofs, using cryptography, the fact that there is always going to be much more funding and much more of whatever on a site, which is maybe not the side on which you're currently sitting on. And that's fine, because we got other skills and we got each other. And that is, in the end, the will and the hope and imagination put in practice is usually what cuts the edge. Not necessarily the terrible threat or fear of something. Because if we give up on that, that's done.
I mean, I would love you to ask how you feel about this transition you're going through, right? About going through from hardcore privacy to compliance. It's not so easy, no? So now, jokes apart, how can we envision a favorable outcome in balancing privacy by design and need for regulatory compliance? And what would you say to someone who would like to commit for privacy but fears the possible consequences?
Yeah, so as I mentioned earlier, I'm transitioning into a compliance guy. As a person who helped with, Tornado Cash, with privacy first ethos, we've learned a lot in the couple of years that we've been working on this stuff, and we try to learn from, what's in front of us and what we've experienced and been through, and the reality is that we're no longer in 2018, 19, where there wasn't threats and there was a lot of hacks, right? My friends, DeFi protocols have gotten robbed left and right, and we can't just ignore that as a category of thing and sort of try to hope that someone else deals with it. We are responsible for the world that we try to build, and it's up to us to make it what we want to live in. And so in terms of compliance, I'm also doing this because I don't want someone else to do it who's more of a bootlicker and would make a system that is easier to exploit. I'm trying to do it in a way that is the least exploitable, and so for example, the first version of privacy pools that we're trying to launch is still going to be an immutable permissionless contract that doesn't have a backdoor. There's other ways to try and potentially dissociate good guys from bad guys, but I much prefer the versions that don't have a backdoor that can be exploited. And so I think it's also up to us to build the narratives that we want to promote. And so one of the things that we are faced with is regulators or governments or whatever saying this is only for bad guys. And I think it's really important that we build things that have legitimate use cases for everybody, your mom and pop, your payrolls, your just making it normal. And so being a compliance guy is not just saying I want to bend the knee to every rule in existence. It's also trying to build for the compliance use cases where it's easiest to take off. So like, for example, Switzerland has a more enlightened view on privacy, and building tools for Switzerland could help legitimize it elsewhere. Because if you go to America, they're saying, oh, it's all just for criminals. We'll say, no, and Switzerland. Which, you know, isn't the best thing, but might be better than just criminals in their view, and you can build on that. And so I think, I don't want to say like, you know, you should just compromise out the gate, but I do want to say that you should try to find the compromises that make sense.
I think you've said a lot. I also see the time up there, so I'll be... No, well, we all said a lot, but I'm trying to say I'm not going to repeat what you said. I also know quite little on the side of compliance. However, for example, I work for NIM. NIM is a fully compliant company. But what we do, we're not going to try to promise you once the fire going to knock the door, we're not going to give your data. Don't trust anyone who's going to tell you that in the first place. It's on a level of code, on a level of how the software is written, how it's audited, open source, free software, and distributed on the different operators, that no one can actually have access to those data. And if you create it on a level of a protocol, then you can be compliant on a level of whatever legal level of things. That's one approach. I did some community contribution as just like writing some, you know, how to use whatever app for this DAO, LunarDao in the past. They have another approach. All the core people there are fully anon. Well, that's another way how to approach compliance. You choose your way. I think have a code which is bulletproof in, you know, you can prove it, you don't have to trust, and have anon development seems like a good option to go for me, but I understand it's not always possible. In fact, I work in a place where that's not the approach, and it's not possible, and might be even better for what NIM tries to achieve, that the company is fully compliant. I don't know, the future will show whether this is a good choice or not, but everything has its own place. There are these different avenues what people can choose, but however, having code which you would have to trust and is a closed source, and a company which is fully compliant and liable on like few people, that seems like a terrible decision. So you always have to have at least some of these stones in place to, you know, to use some software, in my opinion.
Quick take.
Yeah, I think. Well, I think specifically, I mean, you brought PG, you brought the statement up. You know, if I have nothing to hide, why do I need privacy, right? And I think that statement specifically comes from, you know, for like most people, if you want to normalize privacy, right? That's probably like the main argument against privacy that gets brought up, right? And I think that specific statement just comes from the fact that, you know, okay, you think about privacy and you just immediately go to the extreme, right? It's like, okay, well, I've got nothing to hide. Yeah, you do. Like, how many people in here have a door on their bathroom? Like, yeah, everyone. Okay, cool. So the entire room here, you're all like heroin addicts, right? Like, that's the only reason you have a door. Like, why?
Terrorists.
Right? Why do we go to these extremes, right? You know, it's like, yeah, of course you've got something to hide. It's not a bad thing. And I think the response to that also is just not helpful, right? You know, you go and you're like, okay, well, okay, privacy bad because extreme, right? And then the response is like, well, you know, if you don't have privacy, here's all the other extreme things that could happen. And, you know, maybe some of them are true, but like, it's not being realistic in the conversation. Yeah, I'd just like to see a little bit more realism when it comes to this conversation around privacy.
Well, I think time's up. Thanks a lot for coming and sharing, and see you around.
Yes, thank you so much. I feel like that was a perfect note to end on.